And welcome back to Keeping It Real with Alexander Garrett. And today we mourn with the those who have lost their lives and the families of those who lost their lives at Thousand Oaks, California, at Borderline Bar and Restaurant. And I mean, a 28-year-old goes in and guns down 13 kids on college night, but a hero helped rescue 30 of them. His name is Matt Wennerstrom, who was there, and I believe God put him there to rescue 30 people from the Thousand Oaks shooting this late last night, early this morning in New York time. And on the phone with me right now is Dr. Susan Shumsky. Dr. Shumsky, I know I kind of broke the news to you. I'm sorry about that because we had a different topic, but you are a spiritual healer. So tell me what your message would be today following another shooting in America.
You know, it is very sad when we see all of these horrible shootings taking place in the country. And I do believe that a lot of the root of this has to do with not only the food that people are eating, which is GMO food, poison food, and also the drugs that people are being given. Drugs like Ritalin, like Prozac, and the pharmaceutical industry has really taken over America, and people are depending on these drugs to heal them. And in fact, what it's doing is the drugs are making them violent, they're making them out of control, and these horrible events are taking place as a result of a kind of world gone mad through pharmaceuticals and through poison substances that people are ingesting in their bodies. And it's really sad. And so I think my message would be that we can't really understand why these things happen. We don't understand the plan. We don't understand the Creator's plan for us necessarily. And unfortunately, it's just so sad. It does help communities come together in the wake of these tragedies, but it's a sad way for people to come together. It would be a whole lot better if people were already together and not so divisive in this country.
And you say come together, which is going to be a perfect segue into what I actually brought you on today for, because the Beatles are re-releasing the White Album. Now, to be honest with you, until I met you at the National Publicity Summit, I wasn't sure. I had no idea this was happening, but I'm so glad you came up to me at the summit at the Hotel Pennsylvania and let me know this was happening and that you have an inside track to the White Album. And the Beatles message, I think, really could bring healing. And tell us why people should download the re-release tomorrow and your experience with the Beatles.
Well, the thing is that the Beatles, their essential message was all you need is love. They sang about it all the time. In fact, John Lennon and Yoko Ono did these peace bed-ins. That was part of their message, was world peace. And the wonderful animated movie, Yellow Submarine, its message was all you need is love. And it's really, they are more needed today than ever. Their message is more needed today than ever. And the guru that they followed, who was Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, he was also my guru. And I spent 22 years in his ashrams and 6 years on his personal staff. And his message was a message of world peace. And that's why the Beatles were attracted to him. And they wrote the album, it's called the White Album. Its nickname is the White Album. It's actually called The Beatles. That's the name of the album. And it's being reissued on November 9th. And the 50th anniversary is actually on November 22nd. That was the original release of the White Album.
And so, go for it. Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about your connection to the album itself and why you became so ingratiated with the Beatles and the specific album.
Right. So the Beatles wrote this album when they were in India in 1968. They were in Rishikesh, India, studying with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And so all of the lyrics of the songs on that album were highly influenced by Maharishi. And I lived with Maharishi for 22 years and was on his personal staff for 6 of those years. So that's why I know the hidden meanings of the songs that the Beatles wrote under Maharishi's influence. And I reveal them in my book, my memoir that I wrote, which is called Maharishi and Me, Seeking Enlightenment with the Beatles Guru.
And so talk a little more about that memoir, because I know it's out there and people can buy it. Give us details, like where can people buy it, and what did you take out of that experience with the Beatles? And you mentioned some songs you have some hidden meanings behind. So if you have a few minutes, tell us about the hidden meanings of some of those songs on the White Album.
I would love to talk about the songs' lyrics. So, for example, Dear Prudence, that was written about Mia Farrow's sister, Prudence. Mia Farrow was a famous actress from the 1960s. She and her sister traveled to India with Maharishi. They actually flew on the plane with him in January of 1968. And the two sisters were studying with Maharishi at the ashram. And Prudence had been abusing alcohol and drugs earlier in her life. And she actually had spent a little time in a psychiatric hospital as well. And when she was at the ashram in India, she refused to leave her room. She was meditating day and night. She wouldn't come out. And so she was kind of, well, let's put it this way. She had a psychotic break when she was in India, and she was having terrifying LSD flashbacks. So Maharishi took her under his wing, and she was brought to his house daily for 3 weeks. And finally, she recovered. She actually came out of that horrible, scary nightmare that she was in, and became very responsive, very happy. Her life became wonderful. She got married. She had some beautiful kids, and she's now a yoga teacher and a Sanskrit scholar. But when she was in India, Maharishi asked George and John to look in on her, John Lennon and George Harrison, 2 of the Beatles, to look in on her. And in fact, she remembers them bursting into her room, singing Sgt. Pepper and singing Obla-Di, Obla-Da. But she just wanted them to go away and disappear. Excuse me?
Those are 2 great songs from the Beatles, of course. I mean, those are just
absolutely classic. Yes. So she just wanted them to leave so that she could go back into meditation and be in silence. And she doesn't remember them singing Dear Prudence to her. However, just as the Beatles were leaving, George Harrison told her that John had written a song about her called Dear Prudence. And she was so happy when she heard the song on the White Album, because she was afraid that it was going to be like critical of her or make fun of her or something. But it was a very sweet, sweet song. So that's the story behind Dear Prudence.
So what was your interaction with the Beatles themselves? It sounds like you knew them, and you knew them personally for quite a while.
I did not know the Beatles personally. What I did know is I knew Maharishi for 22 years. And therefore, I was a very rare TM insider in Maharishi's inner circle. And that's why I know all of these secrets about what happened when the Beatles were there and the hidden meanings of the songs, which I do reveal in my book, Maharishi and Me.
And of course, one song that swept the nation was Across the Universe because of the movie. And when I saw that song listed, I'm like, I got to get your reaction to that. So what about Across the Universe?
Across the Universe describes transcendental meditation experiences. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was the founder of transcendental meditation. That's the form of meditation that the Beatles learned from him. And in that song, it says, Jai Guru Deva Om. Now, what that means is hail to the holy preceptor, the holy teacher. And what that's referring to is Maharishi's oft-quoted expression. He would say it dozens of times every day. He would say, Jai Gurudev, Jai Gurudev, Jai Gurudev to everyone he would meet. He would say it instead of hello, he would say it instead of goodbye. So that particular appellation was used in that song And that's what it means. And strangely, when Maharishi passed over in 2004, NASA actually projected the song across the universe into the atmosphere towards the star Polaris. That was the song that they projected at the exact time of Maharishi's cremation.
Did you ever think a movie would be made based around that song? Did you ever catch a chance to see that movie across the universe?
I do believe that I did see it, but it was a long time ago, so I barely remember it.
Well, let me ask you this, because also in your one sheet, so to speak, you also mentioned Paul McCartney's still around. So what is it? Because he's still making records? Like what is it about Paul McCartney that has him trending to this very day?
Wow, is he trending? He had 30 million hits on YouTube for Carpool Karaoke. He had his first number one album in 36 years, just came out, called Egypt Station. And he was on 60 Minutes recently. So because he's in the media so much, the Beatles have become more relevant than they've been in decades. And now with this reissue of the White Album in a box set, even more.
Absolutely. And
Paul McCartney is becoming in the forefront, and he's also releasing another album in December.
And he did actually a pop-up concert in Grand Central not too long ago. So he's still very active, and it was they hid that as well as they could, and then finally the day of they said, "Oh, it's Paul McCartney." And I guess whoever knew was there, but I kind of wish I was at that concert because it looked very fun.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. I mean, he released it on his website, and people showed up. So, yes, he's really been doing a lot of publicity, and, he's still going strong. I loved watching the concert. I loved watching Carpool Karaoke. It was very thrilling to see him. I was such a Beatlemaniac when I was a kid. I loved the Beatles, and I still love the Beatles to this day. And right now, I'm at the White Album Symposium, which is taking place at Monmouth University, West Long Branch, New Jersey, at Monmouth.
And who's expected at that symposium?
That's where I am this week.
Who's expected at that symposium? Anybody that might be familiar? Any names that might sound familiar?
Major Beatles authors are going to be there. All the Beatles authors and Beatles scholars, believe it or not, there are Beatles authors and Beatles scholars.
Oh, I believe it. I mean, this was
a lot of them.
It was a phenomenon that was documented. Now, one thing that popped up in my mind as we're talking here is, obviously, Maharishi gave a lot to the Beatles, but what was the impact on the Beatles to him? Like, how did they help him spiritually? How did they impact Maharishi?
They impacted Maharishi hugely because when Maharishi first came to the West in 1959, there was no meditation, there was no yoga, there was no mantra. Within 10 years, Maharishi made these into household terms with a little help from his friends, quote unquote, the Beatles. So they are the band that put Maharishi into the spotlight. And because of the Beatles, even after they left Maharishi in a huff in 1968, Maharishi became more famous and more popular than ever. Millennials don't know who he is, but I have to tell you that in the 1970s, he was incredibly famous. He was always on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. He was on Merv Griffin's show. He was on the cover of every major magazine, Life, Look, Saturday Evening Post, Newsweek. He was on all of the major publications, New York Times.
Oh, he's made it to New York plenty of times, and basically he's been to this big city, and I'm sure people would gather around him when he came into the city. Is that about right? When Maharishi would be in town?
Absolutely. He was so famous, and during his lifetime, he made 40,000 transcendental meditation teachers. He trained them, and 6 million people learned to practice transcendental meditation while he was still alive. And it continues to go strong today with the David Lynch Foundation, the famous director, David Lynch, who did Mulholland Drive, Blue Velvet, and other strange movies. So he has popularized transcendental meditation again. Through his foundation, they're teaching TM to youth who are at risk, to veterans, to abused women. to people in prisons and so on. So it's a charity organization that's teaching TM, Transcendental Meditation, for free to people that need it the most, people who have a lot of stress.
And so you obviously were around Maharishi. How did he impact you? Like, what was his impact on you, and how did he help you grow spiritually? And I would say, as a person for 22 years, there had to be a lot of growth around him during that time.
Absolutely. When I first learned Transcendental Meditation in 1967 during the Summer of Love, I was a mess at that time. But I have to tell you that meditation totally healed me, totally cured me. And I became so happy. For the first time in my life, I experienced something called happiness. I had never experienced that before. And it changed my life completely. It made me feel more self-empowered. It made me feel more integrated, more whole, more content. And I had amazing spiritual experiences from it.
And meditation,
and I practiced it for 20. Pardon me?
And meditation doesn't make it to our news feeds. It doesn't make it to out there. And I think there's that spiritual side that everybody does not talk about, lacks, forgets to talk about, seemingly forgets to talk about when these tragedies like today in California happen. Like there's got to be a revamp of spiritual, and I feel like you're out there. You've got a presence, and you're making the spiritual side relative again. And I see your Twitter feed. You post a lot, and you post about God. It's some good stuff you're posting out there. So I'm glad, and I'm thankful that you're out there pushing that spiritual side, because we need more.
That's my life. My life is about spirituality. It's about meditation. It's about intuition. It's about development, self-development, and it's about healing. And that's what we need today in this country, especially with the divisiveness, especially with, I'm right, you're wrong. All of this going on today, we have to come together, as the Beatles say, all you need is love. And that really is all we need. All we need is love.
Absolutely. And Dr. Susan Shumsky, thanks so much for joining us today. And really quickly, they can buy your book at drsusan.org. And where else can they find your book? And where can they find the album that drops tomorrow?
Right. So they can buy my book anywhere in any online outlets, such as Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target. A lot of places carry the book Maharishi and Me is the name of the book. And the White Album, just Google the White Album. It'll be on Amazon. It'll be everywhere. It's going to be a box set that's dropping tomorrow, November 9th.
And I'm sure you're going to have some fun at that symposium today, so I'll let you get back to that. But thanks so much for taking time out to be on Keeping It Real with Alexandra Garrett today. And it was so great to meet you a couple weeks ago.
Well, it was wonderful to meet you too, Alex, and thank you so much for inviting me to your podcast.
My pleasure. This is Alexandra Garrett, Keeping It Real, and we'll be back